into this because we have a current whistleblower claim by an employee, and it's bouncing back and forth because it came to me, and I'm not in the current ordinance, and so it was then sent to Mr. Bryson, who again said he had no authority to deal with it. So I then stated that it should go to, since it was of a financial nature, the complaint was sent to the comptroller's office and is now being investigated. But I have a couple of additional types of suggestions in terms of this ordinance if it finally is approved by the board. I think that it's important to state from the onset that the Department of Personnel does have for its civil service employees comprehensive administrative regulations which prohibit any kind of harassment, any sort of Title VII violation, discrimination, sexual harassment. I have with me today Sylvia Donaldson, who's the city's employee relations manager, and her unit does conduct comprehensive, I call them cradle to grave kinds of investigations. And because of the level of the investigations that we use, we're usually pretty successful in defending against the EEOC. That being said, there are some gaps that we've noticed in the city's protection because without ordinance authority, I have no way of investigating, for instance, a person who is one of the mayor's cabinet people. They're appointed by her, they're not in the civil service, and while aldermen and elected officials are ultimately accountable, I guess, to the Missouri Ethics Commission, there's this class of employees who are accepted people that don't really answer to anyone other than the mayor. So this was something that was discussed with the original enactment of this bill when I testified about it quite a long time ago. Actually, the mayor's office had wanted to change it, not our friend here today, Jay, but a prior liaison was going to get it changed. It fell through the cracks, and then we're hoping to resurrect this with some changes. I do think it's important, I will state from the onset, that there is a certain level of protection in the state of Missouri for people who whistleblow, because while we're an at-will employment state, the law does recognize an exception for public policy, meaning that if you whistleblow because something wrong is going on, you still have an action. But this is a much more concrete, definitive piece of legislation that we could give to all of our employees. One of the reasons that we wanted to present it to the board is instead of CREA, which has no ordinance authority or statutory authority to investigate civil service employees, my office does. And so in terms of the auditing official, my recommendations would be that under 1A, and maybe you can coach me if I don't know how to do this right, but on page 2, line 3, I think auditing official means instead of the department personnel, to be consistent, I would say the director personnel, comma, the comptroller of the city of St. Louis, and then we go into specifics with the Civilian Oversight Board Executive Director. So that is one change that I would recommend. And that way we have the proper officials in place to investigate the claim based on the nature. So that's my first recommendation for that. And I think that takes care of the ability for the city to be able to have the proper officer investigate and then finally make a recommendation.
If we're going to amend, should we amend as we go along and vote on it, or just wait till we finish?
How many
Mr. Chair.
amendments do you?
I have 1, 2. I only have 3 aldermen.
There's 3 amendments?
Yes.
Are they prepared there?
I looked at them today for a second time with legal staff and shared my concerns, and they said, we think you're right, this would improve the accuracy of it.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, what we have, the bill before us is a repeal of the existing ordinance, but replacing it with a
New ordinance.
slightly modified ordinance that covers the same material but in a slightly different way. But the new one also needs
tweaking.
some tweaks
Right. Correct.
that Mr. Frank has here. So we need, if those are ready, we need to make copies of them and distribute them to the.
Okay.
I have.
He just has them on.
Can we,
He just
has
doesn't have
them.
them on this sheet.
Right.
You have to make
three separate.
And do we
Just
have the
take a
original
second and
ordinance
I'll
No,
look at
in
it.
front of us?
no.
Or do we have something that highlights the changes between the original?
I saw them, I saw them last night and verified it today with council that they agreed with the changes. They're nothing too substantive except for one.
Do we have can we see a do we have a side-by-side though of it? What? Pulling up 70475.
This one, I don't even think it's necessary. I would take one out. And then the last one was just replacing the department personnel with the Civil Service Commission.
Where's that?
Under remedies. That's it.
All right.
Okay, so I'm gonna recommend we write that all up as a single amendment. There's 3 changes in it. We will pause on Board Bill 6 right now while that amendment is prepared. And we will, in the interim, we'll move on to the other bill before us, Board Bill 124. Do you, Mr. Vick, need a minute to? Okay,
I can do it right here really quick.
terrific.
Terry, it's, you wanna take?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
sorry, I didn't know how the process worked.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Don't leave, stick around so
I
we
will
make
be
sure
here, thank
we
you.
got it right. Thank you.
I'm not trying to, but my head is so.
He doesn't.
I just don't feel
Yeah.
like,
You need to come down.
so he.
Can I stay here? Is it okay if I stay?
I'm
I can chair.
co-chair then, because I'm, so my mind is just not
Oh.
focusing.
Right.
You're presenting it.
That's a fair point. I shouldn't share and present at the same time.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Alderman Vaccaro, would you like to share?
I'm actually Terry's
Oh,
gonna check.
okay.
So it's all right.
Great. All right.
My focus, even trying to read stuff, is a little bit hard right now.
Where's the board bid?
Oh, here, can I?
Everybody have a copy?
You got one?
No, I don't.
I do now. Thank you.
Do you have a copy?
Okay.
Alderman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before us is Board Bill 124. Board Bill 124 is just a repeal of an ordinance passed in 1963. The ordinance in 1963, Ordinance 51871, created what was called a Decent Literature Commission, which was a volunteer board with 7 mayoral appointees whose role was to meet and to sort of investigate the distribution of what at the time might have been termed indecent or obscene literature, and to make recommendations to the police department and to the city prosecutor on bookstores to prosecute for selling this material. This, it sounds a little funny today in 2018, but this was a real movement at the time in the country. There was somebody named Charles Keating, who shows up in history, American history, a few times. He was the president or founder of a nationwide organization that went under the name Citizens for Decent Literature, that established chapters in cities all across the country and got ordinances like this passed in many cities across the country. So in 1963, the city passed this ordinance, and shortly thereafter, the county passed basically an identical ordinance. And for the next, I think, roughly 10 years, from roughly 1963 to 1973, roughly, there was an active Decent Literature Commission. There were appointees. They did go into bookstores and look at stuff. They did make recommendations to the municipal prosecutor. And I've been looking through the mayoral records of the time, and there are, what you have in front of you,
We have
that's
some.
not the bill, it's just a couple
Yeah.
snapshots of documents of the time.
I was wondering if this one.
So this one from 1967 is a referral to prosecute a bookstore for selling a title called Cruel Lips. There were about 20 prosecutions, and then around 1968, the Supreme Court issued a series of rulings that are pretty confusing. It's not, it's hard to read those and know exactly what is, obscene and not protected versus protected First Amendment speech. But suffice to say, post-1968, courts were not really, courts were throwing out convictions for selling indecent literature. I should say Charles Keating, of course, he ran this organization nationally until the 70s when things kind of petered out. But he went on to be a central figure in the savings and loan scandal and bailout in the 1980s. Yeah, and served several years in prison. So it was the same. He certainly led an interesting life, the same guy there.
What was his name again?
Keating.
Charles
Keating.
Keating. Yeah. So what the bill does is it simply repeals the section that authorizes the Decent Literature Commission. We don't have appointees to this commission. I can't find any record of recent appointees to the commission. We noticed that this was part of the municipal code because our council is compiling a list of reports that the Board of Aldermen is supposed to receive every year. The Decent Literature Commission is supposed to submit a report on their activities each year. And of course, we don't have those reports because we don't have a Decent Literature Commission. And I can't find, they were certainly active, but I have not been able to find any of those reports ever. So I'm not sure if they ever filed a report. But suffice to say, this is sort of an obsolete part of the municipal code. I don't think we're going to go back to appointing a Decent Literature Commission. Certainly, the distribution of media has changed substantially since 1963. Board Bill 124 just repeals that and cleans up the code so we don't have these obsolete parts of our municipal code that we don't follow. Out with the, you got to throw out the old food in the fridge to make room for new food.
For new rules.
Okay, questions from members of the committee? Alderwoman Howard?
So basically, this is just a cleanup of some old laws that are antiquated.
Correct.
Do we have the old legislation here at all, or is this these remnants of what activities took place through it?
Yes, the bill lists all of the whole
All right.
Oh,
part of
okay,
the
it's in
code.
here,
All in
okay.
that
I
we're
thought I saw it
repealing.
somewhere.
Okay,
Yeah.
the whole thing.
And
Okay.
it's only parts that authorize the Decent Literature Commission and explain its role and responsibilities. It doesn't touch on anything else having to do, there are other laws in the city that deal with like distributing pornography, those types of things. It doesn't touch any of that
So
stuff.
this will
at all.
just
the
just
decent
disband the commission,
That we have, right, the commission that
That
doesn't
hasn't met
exist, correct.
who knows when. Okay, that's all I have.
Alderwoman Murphy?
Same thing, it sounds like long overdue house cleaning. Thank you.
Alderwoman Navarro?
No questions.
Chairman Picaro? Okay. There's no other questions, we could entertain a motion.
I make a move that we make a do-pass recommendation for Board Bill 124 and pass it out of committee.
Second?
Been moved and seconded that we pass Board Bill 124 out with a due-pass recommendation. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion on the motion, Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Kennedy,
Aye.
Alderman Boyd, Alderwoman Howard,
Aye.
Alderwoman Hubbard, Alderwoman Murphy,
Aye.
Alderman Ogilvy,
Aye.
Alderwoman Navarro,
Aye.
Alderwoman Middlebrook, Alderman Vaccaro, President Reed. You have 6 aye votes, Mr. Chairman.
By your vote, you sustain the motion.
Thank you.
Vice Chair?
It's funny, it's like spitting on the sidewalk, you know?
Oh, I thought it was not a problem.
This is when times were simpler.
Yeah.
There's been times where,
Times were
I don't
simpler.
or
know.
simpler?
I think
No, they were
so.
just witch hunts.
No, they were
You know,
after.
That would
You
really.
remember?
Well, I mean, they were after.
That's after the musical hair.
Yeah, oh yeah, remember that?
Uh-huh.
Oh, sure, sure. I remember when my mother.
68, yes.
You check the review to
Oh,
see what a
Calcutta
movie
was
was
the other
based
one.
on.
The Calcutta.
Oh, Calcutta.
Yeah, I couldn't go see Bambi.
Or you couldn't go see it.
No, I
That
had
was
to-
just.
I think 68 Old Calcutta did come to
They-
town.
they
There was a
checked
big
Calcutta.
row
Well,
at the
here
Board of
came
Aldermen
Yeah,
over
here
it.
came
Hair came and
Hair
they
too.
closed it down.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a problem. You
I
familiar with
can't
him?
remember that.
Everybody read about it.
You,
I
she read
didn't
about
see
it.
it
not history
live
to
or
us.
Yeah,
anything.
she read about it, yeah.
Now, I had a question for you, actually, on that.
For you, who?
For Terry, where did that,
That's it.
Arthur
The
G.
trans-
Kennedy,
Mhm.
are you related to him at all?
We're not.
No, okay.
No, this was something, I did it.
This
Yeah, I
was
saw that
this is a
too.
request to fund a secretary
Uh-huh.
for the Decent Literature Commission that the.
Arthur Kennedy was on the decent,
Which
was
was
on the.
rebuffed.
No,
was
he
the
was
director of
director of
welfare.
welfare for the.
Oh, director, right, right. They later named he was in the trade industries also. And so they named a construction school for him for a while.
Oh, yeah,
Arthur
yeah,
J.
yeah.
Kennedy, remember?
I remember, yeah, and it was, they used it sort of as an alternative school.
They did.
Yeah, yeah, because Ivory Lofton was head of it, I remember.
But Rhodey's dad was on the committee.
He was on that committee?
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this, Alderman Kennedy.
What's that?
The Kennedy room, who is that?
Yeah, we can, just for the
Your father.
cameras,
I thought
we're gonna
so,
take
but I
a
wasn't
brief
sure.
recess while we prepare those amendments.
Yes,
and
yes,
That,
that-
no,
that's
cool,
neat.
that was this book.
We'll come back. You are welcome to continue, probably before we move to any amendments, we should give committee members a chance to ask questions.
Well, thank you.
Go to the amendments. Do you have anything else to say before we?
No, I just think that, refining this will make a better bill and it'll make it more clear to our employees, all employees, both civil service and others, a plan of action if they do suffer any adverse conditions of employment.
Ms. Insomka?
Yeah, one thing I neglected to add is one of the problems on an operational level is how does this get disseminated? And what we would do is we would have this form like the Employee Code of
Oh, I'm
Conduct.
sorry, I gave you the wrong one. Give me that.
When a new employee is hired, they have to fill out a number of forms and they go through new employee orientation. We will give them this form so that they're advised of it. We will do the training on this, and then on an annual basis, we will provide them with this form, with this board bill, so that they know that they have these protections in addition to the civil service rule. So that way we have a mechanism for knowing that everybody has the policy on an annual basis and are aware of it.
Okay, I think we can take questions from committee members. Alderman Kennedy?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So this repeals the entire old ordinance, and then there were enough substantial changes in this that you don't have to highlight all the other changes that were from the old.
No.
All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, Alderwoman Murphy.
Okay, this bill is going to give the Personnel Department the authority to have a stronger whistleblower, or enact a whistleblower
Yes.
law. Okay, so that's basically what it gives,
Yes.
gives your department the authority, whereas it didn't have it before.
Right, that's correct.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
Alderwoman Navarro, do you? Alderwoman Navarro, do you have any questions for the sponsor, for Mr. Frank, before we get to the amendment?
Okay. No, I do not have any
Okay.
questions.
Good suggestions, thank you.
Yeah, I'll bring them up for you guys.
Chairman Vaccaro, any questions?
No questions.
Okay, I understand an amendment has been prepared. Alderman
I'd like to
Howard, would you
present amendment number 1. Are we going to present these as one amendment, all three?
This is 1, 2, 3.
They're written up as three, so I guess I think we're gonna have to go through them.
Amendment number 1.
We got 6.
Yeah, he knows.
Okay, well, we're going to do 1, right?
Yeah, one.
All right, amendment number 1 to Board Bill number 6 is to amend said Board Bill, page 2, line 3, as follows. It would be auditing official means Director of Personnel, City of St. Louis, insert in lieu thereof, Director of Personnel. You would strike Department of Personnel, City of St. Louis,
Oh,
and
put
insert
Director.
Director of Personnel.
Okay.
Okay.
I move we approve Amendment 1 to Board Bill number 6.
Second.
Previous role.
There's a motion and a second. There is a request for previous roll.
We didn't have previous roll, did we?
On the
On
other
this
On
bill.
the
bill?
other bill.
Oh, okay.
We
On
have-
the other bill.
We have what Ross told us.
Is there any objection to previous roll? No objection. Amendment 1 to Board Bill 6 is approved.
Okay, wait a
Amendment-
minute.
Amendment 2 is before us.
Page 3, line 19.
Alderwoman Howard, you're welcome to discuss Amendment 2.
All right, amendment number 2 to Board Bill number 6. To amend Board Bill page 3, line 19 through line 21 as follows. Beginning on page 3, line 19, strike out the following words and figures. Employees shall report sexual harassment, discrimination, a violation of this ordinance, a violation of ordinance 68715 to any civil rights issues, or any civil rights issues to the Department of Personnel, and renumber the subsequent sections under section 4A accordingly.
Okay, I move we adopt Amendment 2 to Board Bill 6.
Second and previous role.
So motion and a second. There's a request for previous roll. Is there any objection to previous roll? Hearing none, Amendment 2 is approved. Alderwoman Howard, your Amendment 3.
Amendment number 3 to Board Bill number 6, to amend said Board Bill page 6, line 6, as follows. Beginning on page 6, line 6, strike out the words Department of Personnel possible remedies, and insert in lieu thereof, Civil Service Commission.
Okay, I move we adopt Amendment 3 to Board Bill 6.
Second.
There's a motion and a second.
Previous role.
There's a request for previous roll. Is there any objection to previous roll? Hearing no objection, Amendment number 3 to Board Bill 6 is adopted. Are you ready?
So,
Are you waiting for some copies?
well, do you want me to talk about these 3 changes while we wait on the copies, or?
I'm going to, well, let's wait for the copies. So it's
Okay.
in front of everybody, I guess. While we're waiting for those copies, if Mr. Frank is able to discuss, not in specific terms, but in general terms, how the whistleblower policy has been working so far.
We've only had 2 complaints, and the first one was adequately resolved when it was forwarded from Korea to me. And so then we did an investigation, and we had an action, and it didn't go any further. The second one is currently still being undertaken, and I received an email from Deputy City Councilor Nancy Kissler, who's over litigation, saying that it would be a good time to ask for Alderwoman Howard to again introduce this, because it was sort of being bandied back and forth. Again, as I said, it went to Korea, they couldn't do anything about it. It came to me first, I couldn't do anything about it. The comptroller says she can't do anything about it. And I appreciate the committee approving this last thing with the commission. I don't have the authority to reinstate an employee or tell Judge Bush or anybody else what to do, but the commission does. So if there's a civil service employee who it's been found has been the subject of whistleblower retaliation, the commission, they can take this to the commission, the recommendations go there, and the commission can order reinstatement per the charter. So I think this will help this become, an ordinance with some teeth. But we've only had 2 complaints so far. And I think part of that, if I can just finally add, is because Sylvia gets all sorts of complaints. We have about 6,800 civil service employees, and then about 300 career seasonal, so that's about 7,000, and then we've got per performance employees, and all those can appeal to Sylvia, grievances, but also we have a lot, tons of those, and she and her staff do a really very in-depth job, and they can just walk in and make the complaint, and some of the things we see are unbelievable. But So I think that, those processes will still stay in place, but this will just help amplify and educate people about it.
So she can resolve, a lot of things are resolved
Yes.
as they,
If there happen
go.
to be violations of EEO law, or if there happen to be harassment complaints or grievances and those kind of things, they come through us and we are able to investigate them.
Something I'm happy to say too, to the committee is that in the past, we've had a lot of troubles with the police division, and I've talked to Jeff about it just last night, and they're happy because they used to languish in internal affairs for sometimes up to 2 years. Sylvia has tight timeframes, so now the police commissioner, this police commissioner, sends all of the EEO, internal complaints, grievances come to us. And so now Sylvia is doing those, and they're getting more quickly resolved, and I think limiting the city's potential liability. So I really appreciate what Judge Jimmy Edwards and Commissioner Hayden in particular have done, because more work for Sylvia, but we get a lot of complaints, and so it's kind of like an outside view looking in instead of policing yourself.
Also, along with that, I don't know if it's annually, but we've gotten reports on how many complaints are filed and
That's correct.
what the findings are. And is that annually you
It
put that
is,
out?
we've changed our format, so we just finished the annual report for 2016 and 17. And we give it to, of course, all the members of the Board of Aldermen, and you'll see exactly how many complaints were filed, how many were sustained, how many were not. And we've got a pretty heavy volume, so. But the good thing is that while other corporations have seen an explosion in Me Too, we haven't, because we've always dealt with those pretty aggressively, zero tolerance for that. So we have not seen that increase in complaints.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Frank,
Thank you.
for that summary. Is there another amendment that's going to be?
We have amendments 4, 5, and 6. Do you want me to talk about, we don't have those working copies.
Okay, let's do this on the perfection calendar, if we're going to amend it at this point. I feel like I'm going to make a motion to adopt Board Bill number 6 as amended. Is there a second?
You are not gonna finish?
Well, I think what he's saying is we'll do it as a floor substitute. Well, as I was saying, and I'll second it. I think it's up to everybody here if they want to do it now, or I think because of the other meeting, I think. But I'm fine with anything, but I'll second that.
Motion and a second to adopt Board Bill number 6 as amended with the due pass recommendation. Is there any discussion?
So the concern is the length of time.
Yeah, I'm not going to be here on Friday,
Well, Friday's second reading.
second reading, okay.
Right, so
We
it'll be
can't
a
amend it then,
Yeah,
so
okay.
we can certainly change the timing of it.
Do you want me to run through what the 3 are, or no?
No, I think we should write it up as a single floor sub for the perfection calendar, so we can, there's always the danger in doing so many amendments on the fly that these things are not done correctly, especially when we already have amendments that we've done. And I'm also concerned we're gonna lose a quorum before too long, so, I think if we write it up as a floor sub, it'll be,
Who has to leave?
I'm the only one who has to leave, and I'm not.
Terry has to leave too.
Oh, okay.
So, but just write in what you're going to have.
Yeah, and we can write it up as
There's a floor
a
substitute.
single floor
It'll
sub
go
with
through
with all the changes. Yeah,
I have one more
we can be
that'll be
incorporated.
incorporated.
Beautiful.
Yeah, just get together, do a floor substitute.
Okay, are we gonna vote this out?
There's
Yes, it
been a
is.
motion and a second on a due pass recommendation for Board Bill number 6 as amended.
Previous roll.
Mr. Clerk, please
Now,
call the roll.
previous roll.
Previous rules.
Is the request for previous roll? Is there any?
Well, I'd like to say no, just so that I can be on the record that I'm not okay with it as it is, and I plan to amend it.
Okay, there's an
I
objection to
object to
previous
previous
roll.
roll.
Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy,
Aye.
Alderman Boyd, Alderwoman Howard,
Aye.
Alderwoman Hubbard, Alderwoman Murphy,
Aye.
Alderman Ogilvy,
Aye.
Alderwoman Navarro,
No,
Alderwoman Middlebrook, Alderman Vaccaro,
Aye.
President Reed.
And
You have 5
Ed-
aye votes,
Ed-
1 no
Ed-
vote. Chairman.
Ed-
5
my name
aye
to the
votes,
floor
1 no vote,
substitute.
the motion is sustained. No other business being before the committee, the legislature committee is adjourned. Thank you.
Get my name to the floor, so.
Thank you.
Thanks.